Welcome to In Case You Forget, a podcast for foster care caseworkers who carry more than anyone sees. If this work feels heavy and follows you home, this is a space to process, reflect, and remember why you said yes. I'm Jamie Cabe.
And I'm Jamie Finn. We're so glad you're here.
Welcome to In Case You Forget, a podcast for foster care caseworkers who carry more than anyone sees. If the work feels heavy and follows you home, this is a space for you to process, reflect, and remember why you said yes. I'm Jamie Cabe.
And I'm Jamie Finn. We're so glad you're here. Today, we're excited to introduce you to Austin Ludwig. Austin is a self-produced artist, speaker, and foster care advocate based in Atlanta, Georgia. After experiencing years of abuse and spending much of his childhood in foster care, he aged out of the system at 18. In the midst of that brokenness, Austin encountered the love of Jesus and found healing through the gospel. Today, he shares his story through music and ministry, encouraging others that God can redeem even the most painful stories.
Oh my goodness, I'm already inspired by this bio. I love Austin's story. We're going to actually explore a few things in this episode around what children in foster care actually experience, how to navigate the emotional weight of the work. This is for you, caseworker, and how to sustain your heart and faith as you serve. Austin, I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the show.
Well, I am very happy to be here, and I get to do various podcasts and things of that nature. But it's always a unique privilege to sit down with friends, and we just were together a month or so ago, hanging out in Pennsylvania. It was cold like I've never felt in my bones, but it's just so cool. I love consistency and to be able to call you friends. So thank you for having me on. Now, this is a new specific setting, and you guys may have received this question before, but how do people address
who's interviewing
Jamie?
who here?
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. I just need to set this framework. When I say Jamie, how does that work? Who responds?
Well,
the Jamies.
Yeah, right. I have my
Okay.
kids. My kids as friends call me Mama J. So
Okay.
there you go.
So what's funny is in my life, my sister-in-law's name is Jamie. And so I'm used to in my life people calling me Jamie Finn.
Okay.
So you can call me Jamie Finn and I'll
Okay.
answer to that.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll see if we cross that bridge. If it
See,
gets
Austin
confusing.
is used to being the podcast host.
Yes,
so he's
exactly.
going
I'm
to
not
try to
trying
take
the
over.
reins. No. I just need to know. I need to know for my own sake. So,
You just say, hey. Just say,
Hey, and we'll
yeah,
respond.
and we'll respond.
someone will respond. Perfect.
We'll
Yeah.
respond in kind.
Awesome.
Love it. So good.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I also want to know, Austin, you have been on my podcast, the Forgotten Podcast, as well before. Episode 267, Beauty Woven in the Brokenness, where you really talked about your story. So I want to encourage our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, that's going to be a great way to get a fuller picture of your story. But as we begin here, I know you have experienced foster care firsthand, so I would love for you to give us a little bit of context of your personal story and especially how you experienced caseworkers in your journey.
Yeah, like you said, if people want a deeper look at the full story, they can go listen. But to give like a brief recap, I did walk through a lot of brokenness, like a lot of alum have, and ended up in the foster care system my teenage years. But the unique thing about my story is that we were one of those families that probably should have ended up in the foster care system a lot sooner than we did. I think obviously priority, family preservation, reunification, all of that. And we were one of those families that we really probably should have ended up, sooner than we did. And so that meant there was like years of, I guess, case managers and social workers in our lives very frequently before we entered the foster care system. Like I remember 8 to 10 social workers over my experience, like even before entering the foster care system. And at that time before foster care, and I think this is probably the experience for a lot of foster youth, the social workers were kind of like the Gestapo. Like that's how your parents, articulated these people. There was always this perspective of be on your P's and Q's. This is kind of the enemy. Like we have to, make sure everything is, we're being inspected like that. We're under a
Mhm.
magnifying glass. That was the reality. And so before foster care, for the most part, as a preteen, in those years, that was kind of my perspective of social workers and case managers. And you're already a kid, right? So all you have is what you're observing, what your parents are telling you, and then so you're trying to
Sure.
piece these things together. And as you get older, your brain develops, and you're kind of starting to paint your own narrative that's a little clearer. But when we ended up in the foster care system, that was my general bent. And then once my siblings and I, when we entered foster care, that began to shift a little bit, because amongst the uncertainty and the craziness of all that was happening, social workers, the case managers we did have, became the consistent humans in a very inconsistent season. And so all of a sudden, there's something that shifts in your perspective. And I felt that shift happen. And I remember, a unique part of
Mm.
my story was when I went into foster care. I was actually away at a friend's house, and was skateboarding home, and there was a notice
Mm.
on our door, that the state was looking for Austin Ludwig and all this stuff. And I was actually on the run, so to speak,
Mm.
for about 2 weeks, like sleeping on couches at friends' houses. And I was, 13 years old. And eventually a cop picked me up, and then a social worker came and picked me up from the police and drove me to my first foster home. And I remember sitting in the car with this new social worker, this new case manager, I guess. And I looked at them and I said, I've been told my entire life not to talk to strangers, and you're about
Mhm.
to literally ask me to live with one.
Yeah, so bizarre.
Yeah. So yeah, from there, anyways, like, but I remember just, she was so kind. She was so loving. She was
Mm.
kind of a consistent case manager that I had throughout a lot of my time in foster care. And then when my parents' rights were terminated, I ended up moving into a long-term placement at WinShape Homes and a group home. And I had a social worker there. But I remember throughout that time in foster care, my perspective shifting and just,
Mm.
seeing this consistent, even like form of attachment with a social worker, that occurred. And yeah, now to this present day, a lot of the work I get to do is working at a foster care agency, raising awareness, doing all that. And we get to partner with social workers in various ways. And I look back now and I just feel immense gratitude and understanding that I didn't have when I was a kid,
Mm.
and as I get older, that gratitude continues to increase for social workers.
Mm.
I'm so glad that the people who are listening are going to get to hear that,
Me too.
because
Yeah.
I think it's probably very rare that they get to hear thank you
Mm.
from the kids they're serving. They probably don't even hear it from the families they're serving, the biological families, the
Mhm.
foster families. So I think it's so important for them to hear that thank you. And I think it's also so important for them to hear the, the attachment, the love you felt, all of that. That's huge. It's funny to hear you say what I know to be true on, like, the foster parent side. Like, my kids have told me before, yeah, my mom has told me, like, "Dyfus is evil, they try to steal kids, like, I've heard that on my side. So,
Yeah.
knowing that a lot of, most of the people who are listening are caseworkers, like,
Yeah.
what thoughts do you have for a caseworker who's like, "Man, that is the last thing that I want a kid that I'm coming to serve to feel from me."
Yeah.
Like, what can they do to tear down those those roadblocks, the fear, the like, do you have any thoughts? Like, what worked in tearing that down?
Yeah, I think it's such a reality. Like, they are aware of it, that they're already coming in at this relational deficit, and they're actually having this challenge, which is to honestly create a more correct narrative about who they are, what their intentions are, the good motives, all of that. And that doesn't happen immediately, especially when a kid is in the middle of crisis, in the middle of extreme trauma. And so, just very practically, I think, like, consistency matters. And I know that for case managers, a lot of times they don't have control over the moving pieces, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of ups and downs and instability. But I feel like just consistently showing up, I think kids, when they enter into care, they, because they're in survival mode, they're actually hyper aware. Like, they may seem to
Mm.
us disconnected. Like, when a foster youth moves into your homes, a lot of them, sometimes they are, austere and detached or whatever, but actually don't perceive that as
Mm.
like disconnected or unaware. I think they're actually hyper aware of their surroundings. They're a sponge, and I think that's the case with case managers,
Mm.
and social workers. They are very observant of the little things, which is tough because you're kind of under a
Mhm.
microscope if you're a case manager. But it's also an opportunity, I think, to again be that very human bridge in the midst of what feels like a very inhumane system in a moment. And so I would just say a huge thing for me that I really appreciated, especially as between the ages of like 13 and 15, was having case managers who talked to me, honestly, like I was older than I was. I think
Mm.
sometimes we try to sugarcoat things for young people. We
Yeah,
try
sure.
to package them in a way that's
Mm.
digestible.
Mm.
And what I really appreciated was like, hey, give it to me straight. Like, I
Mm.
feel like nothing is true right now. So
Mm.
can you just give me truth, even
Mm.
if it hurts me? And I feel
Mm.
like the case managers who were able to do that for me, this is just speaking for me personally, that really helped build trust quickly. For them to be
Mm.
like, hey, the truth is that it's quite likely that you could be here for a very long time, rather than saying, let's be
Mm.
hopeful, let's be, all of
Yeah,
Yeah,
this.
right.
sure.
Like, the best thing for me was to be like, this is the reality. And it
Mm.
hurt, but I think in hindsight, it really helped me.
Yeah, because otherwise you're getting your hopes up and dashed over and over and over, which ultimately hurts more. Speak more to the impact of those workers who were consistent, who showed up, who gave you those words of truth. Like, speak more to like the impact of that on your life and your
Mm,
experience, and even is there an impact even in the way you exist today because of
mm.
it?
Yeah. When I entered foster care, like I said, I had all these various experiences with case managers, social workers, but it was a new reality being in foster care and having like that assigned case manager within the system. Whereas prior, it was just kind of these touch points. My parents are working a case plan and all of that. And so I remember this one case manager, like I said, who was there throughout those years of kind of, there was this period where it was my father ended up in jail, and there was this give and take of all these court hearings and bouncing around a bit of whether or not my parents' rights would be terminated. And then once that happened, that was the season where there was just this gap where parents' rights were terminated. I had a social worker communicate to me the reality that, hey, you're going on the age of 15, and it's unlikely you're going to get adopted. You don't really want to get adopted. So that means you probably will be in the foster care system for the rest of your childhood. And so there was this honestly just purgatory moment that felt like absolute desperation. And
Mhm.
that was the season that I remember most clearly, literally getting picked up, going to get ice cream with a case manager.
Mm.
And then that case manager actually was the person who was just like the moving piece of a facilitator. A local church began to reach out to me and visit me, and they were honestly that bridge that took me to these visitations to see these people that I knew in my youth group and all that. And so
Hmm.
during that purgatory season or whatever,
Mm.
it was monumental for me just having that consistent
Mm.
person. And then from there, WinShape Homes, which is a foundation part of WinShape that I work at now, they heard about my case, 16 years ago, that I needed a long-term solution. And then there was a case manager there. Her name's Gretchen Harder. It was her first case, myself and my older sister. And
No way.
yeah, her first case as a case manager. And she worked at WinShape, and she was assigned to me as we were moving into the home. And I remember her as well, just being such a kind, loving presence.
Mm.
And she is somebody that I get to work with to this day. And I
No
see in staff
way.
What?
meetings, yeah, a case
That's
manager that I
wild.
had. So 16 years later. So What a gift that is. What a weird, unique gift that is. And so, yeah, I just think about these again, these very human moments in the midst of what felt like a complex system. That's what I remember, and that's had a lasting impact on me.
That's incredible. It's not just sort of like the way that the cases play out and the decisions that are made. It's the small moments and the connections that happen. And I've heard you talk about your foster parents before and the way the church showed up for you. And there's just so many people in your story. And I love to see how God just sent people and that some of those people were in like what we call quote unquote the system, that it was just people. So the people who are listening, like how can they show up for the kids they're serving with intentionality and care in these moments, with sensitivity, with love, like you're saying, like you said, ice cream showing up and how they felt like, how can they show up with that sensitivity and care?
Kids remember when others remember little things and little facts about them. And I feel like just that piece of being seen, like having a case manager who remembered the little details down to, the fact that I liked ice cream and what flavor did I like. And like those little things, they can feel like sometimes with case managers have crazy heavy loads and tons of cases and kids. And, like I think kids notice when you notice them, and it's not just, you feel like a person and not just a part of that case file. And that's really felt. It really is. And I think even in those little moments where you interface with your case manager, like, Karen Purvis has just these core pillars that empower children. And one of them is like giving a child voice and giving them that, in other words, like voice equals like choice, like being a part of the
Mm,
conversation, having input. And I think when case managers can do that as well, it's like, it doesn't have to be monumental, but it's like, what are
mhm.
those little things that they can do that give a child a decision, like looking for the opportunity for that
Yeah.
kid to feel like they're making a decision for their
Mm,
life. And it doesn't have to be super crazy, but it's like going out of your way to be like, I don't know, you decide. Those little moments, if we can implement those in the midst of feeling
yeah.
completely out of control of your life, being offered back a little bit of that power, a little bit of voice. I feel like
Mhm,
case managers have an opportunity to do that. I think foster parents do as well, but I think case managers do too.
mhm. What would be some reminders that you wanna give to our listeners of, like, when like you talked earlier, Austin, about how I might not show that I appreciate it. I might not even know in that moment how much I appreciate it or will come to appreciate it. So, like, yeah, how can we help our caseworkers like know that what they're doing is important even when they're not hearing it from anybody? In fact, they may be hearing the opposite or seeing the
Yeah.
opposite. Yeah, how can you remind them some of those?
I feel like social workers, case managers in general are some of the most misunderstood
Hmm.
Hmm.
people in the community when it comes to what what they're really trying to do. You have this baseline narrative that the general population seems to believe, which is, you know, these are the people who come take your kids away from you. And so I think like just like helping communicate a better narrative, what you guys are doing, sitting, having
Mm.
conversations like this, I think any opportunity we have to clarify the narrative that 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 social workers are here to protect kids so that they can flourish, that they're there for their good. We sat on
Mhm.
a panel last year with one of our churches here in Atlanta called Christ Covenant, and I sat with them, and it was a really cool dynamic where we had some people from the local DFACs in DeKalb and Fulton County here in Atlanta, some social workers, some case managers sit with us on the panel, and it was just a really sweet opportunity to let people ask Q&A, to do Q&As,
Mhm.
and people to ask kind of hard questions, and then to hear them help
Mm.
clarify in a loving
Uh-huh.
way.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important because we can talk about it all day, but I think too, like, how do we, yeah, elevate the voice of
Yes.
social workers, case managers, because when you hear them talk about it, when you hear their passion come from them, that's what I think can really shift stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I just kind of followed that trail of thought, but yeah, I think, there's a story that's told, but there's a truer story I think that can be told.
Yes. I mean, I know that I have heard from many caseworkers talking about the impact, the physical impact. I'll never forget listening to a caseworker share. It was on the Forgotten podcast, actually, where she talked about how she would wake up in the middle of the night and vomit. That's how her body responded to the point that she had to ultimately leave because physically she wasn't able, like her body was responding to all the trauma she was experiencing. But she was there and walking through this for a while before she finally said, "I can't do this." I mean, these people care.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to what you're saying, Austin, of we had someone come and talk to the families we serve, basically sharing about the limitations of what a worker can actually control. And just kind of saying like, "Hey, here's their lane, and we want you to know this is the only lane that they can operate within." And all of the things that you think that they're doing and that they have control in, they actually don't. And that's why I love what you were sharing about, like, helping the kids feel seen and known, paying attention to what they love and their preferences and what they said last time, that they like ice cream and the flavor they like, because there's so much that's outside of their control. Like, they cannot send a child home or ensure that a child stays in a safe adoptive family or whatever it is that child wants. They can't make that happen. But what they can do is make that child feel seen and safe and loved when they're with them. And so, can you talk to what that means when maybe the home that a child is in doesn't provide that, or
Mm.
the home that a child was removed from didn't provide that?
Mm,
Like, just what it means to be seen
mm,
and known and loved, and how formative that is. That, like, I know there's like a quote of like, it takes one nurturing adult to
Yeah.
transform.
mm.
Like,
Yeah.
can you talk
Yes.
about that? Because I think you are the story of like a bunch of adults playing a part in your story. Can
Yeah.
you talk to that?
Yeah. You know, at WinShape, like we have in-house case managers, and when kids end up, as you know, they do often, kids get adopted out of foster care, but they've been in the system for a long time. So then you can kind of, I think there's opportunities to talk to those kids too about w- hearing their experience with this longevity with case managers for 2, 3 years. And, once they're adopted, there's kind of this, I don't know, this security and opportunity. And I just like, just speaking to that, like I am hearing from them just all of the things that we think are so simple and practical are so deep and profound, like secure attachment, like being with the same case manager. It's the reason, not this is not a plug for WinShape, but it's the reason we have case managers in house so that we can create that consistency, right? Because the flourishing of a child depends on it. There's studies, the statistics show that. But
Yes.
when you talk to the kids, that's where you really see the impact of what that looks like. I think that it was significant. I remember when I was kind of in that like purgatory season, which is when my parents' rights were terminated. There was just this
Mhm.
huge uncertainty of where I was going, what was going to happen, and there was a lot of like complexity with the courts around all of it because of parents' rights. Dad was in jail, rights were terminated. He kind of had rights. It was all and but I remember when there was finally a court hearing where the judge finally greenlit me being able to move into a group home of permanency.
Mm.
I remember finding that out, being in the courtroom. sitting, I've got my court appointed lawyer, but then I've got my case manager who's present as well. And the first person that I lock eyes with for like celebration was my case manager. I looked over and was just like, and because that was it. I didn't have any family in that room. I didn't
Mhm.
have any other familiar face. I had the case manager who was the most familiar person, who was the most aware, more than the judge, more than anybody
Uh-huh.
else in that room, more than my court
Uh-huh.
appointed lawyer, who was the most aware of my story, of the hardship that I was facing, of my actual lived experience.
Mm.
And that was the person I got to connect with and have a connected moment of eye to eye contact, of a smile, of celebration. And that's what I look back on and think about as profound and memorable. And that just someone to celebrate a really big win, that goes a long way.
That's awesome. I love to hear that, and it's hitting me how it is. I mean, Jamie, you've alluded to it, you've said it, Austin, but just these small things, like, even the fact the caseworker doesn't have the control over when you go home, but the caseworker is the one to often have to tell you the hard news or the
Mhm.
good news, right? And so but even that worker who's willing to tell you the hard news, you valued so deeply.
Yeah.
It's just such a highly relational role and such a beautiful opportunity, and yet relational roles, especially when you're walking with people who are navigating trauma, can be very, very draining and
Yeah.
very overwhelming. Would you have any encouragement for caseworkers as they're starting to feel the overwhelm of all that
Mm.
they're walking with, and how can they stay motivated and engaged, especially in those hard days?
I think that when we carry really heavy things, all the secondary trauma, the stress of, like the story you shared, going to sleep at night and you're wondering, like, did I do that thing that I needed to do? And the ripple effect of how that could affect a child and their all safety and all the things. It's like there's an immense amount of, I would say, something that really weighs on my heart for case managers is there's a lot of responsibility, but not a lot of authority. And when those two things are out of balance in a workplace and a job and a system and anything in life, it creates such an immense pressure. And that is a lot of times what case managers are signing up for, is a lot of responsibility with very little authority, like you guys said, to make those decisions. And so I feel like for case managers, it's easy to go into this mindset that nobody can understand, and then to begin to like isolate and
Mm,
and carry that on your own. And I think just the and just this is just personal experience and observation. I believe that the case managers that I know personally who are able to thrive are those who really do focus on prioritizing opening up, going to therapy, being in community. A lot of the case managers that I see that are flourishing are those who are in church community and are able to bring people in, even when they don't feel like they can fully understand. I think that just continuing to open up to people and just talking about things. There's science around how that literally, it's like lifting it off a little bit, right? And so even if it's someone who has no idea whatsoever, really could never fully understand, I think finding trusted voices that you can just process that stuff out loud. I know not everybody can afford therapy either, so I want to be mindful of that, but just like finding friends and people. And I hope that opportunities to be reminded of the why. If every case manager, every social worker didn't get in it for the money, they didn't get in it for the recognition. They got in it because at one point or another, they had a deep burning passion to care for the vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I know firsthand, being in this work day to day, how that can it doesn't matter how great of a person you are, that thing can slowly drift into the periphery, your original why.
mhm.
And every day we have to fight to go This is why I do what I do. And
Uh-huh.
it's not about a systematic reality and institution, but it's about the one individual child. It's coming back to humanizing it. And so
Mhm.
that's it. If I could encourage a case manager to do anything, it's to find ways to keep that central. When you have tons of kids and you're bouncing around every day and you're interacting with them and you got case files and all this stuff, it's very easy for that to become not personified or human anymore. I understand that. And so it's just fighting to find ways to make sure that we don't lose sensitivity, that we don't become calloused and it just becomes
Mhm.
a job. What once was a passion can very quickly just become a job. And I get it. If you're working in a really, really hard space, you start to get thick skin. But the question is, how do we keep a soft heart at the same time?
That's good.
And personally, I think like a relationship with Jesus is the number one thing that does that, because nobody bared the crushing weight of immense pressure carrying across. Like that's what case managers do. They carry across. They are misunderstood. They are accused falsely. They are enduring trauma that they had nothing to do with. They're taking responsibility for trauma that is not their fault. And to me, when I look at Jesus and the cross, that's who he is. Jesus was, in some form or fashion, a social worker. And so I find that if people can cling to Jesus, and those that I see who do that, who are case managers, I think they're the most thriving with longevity in this space. And so I would encourage that as well.
Wow, Austin, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for who you are. Thanks for your heart and for sharing your perspective. We value you so very much.
Yeah, that was so good. I mean, truly no better way to end than to just like preach the gospel that way, because I don't know what better hope there is than that. Like you said, I mean, there is just so much injustice, so much brokenness, so much hard. And so the hope of the gospel in the midst of all of that. And thank you for someone who has lived through the injustice and brokenness and all of that and has experienced the hope of the gospel. You're not a caseworker, but you know the system in that really deep way. And to be able to offer that hope, I think, is going to be deeply meaningful. And so I appreciate the way you just ended us in that way. I think that that's really meaningful and important. So thanks, Austin, for being a part of today.
Yeah. Thank you, friends, for having me.
If this episode reminded you that you are not alone in this work, share it with another foster care caseworker who may need to hear it. And remember, your work matters, and so do you.
Resonate.